What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Tape. And today I am thrilled to bring to you my first 2026 mock draft of this draft cycle. I normally do way too early mocks, right after the previous draft ends, but for whatever reason, I just decided against it this year. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful I did. There's a lot of names that wouldn't have been in that mock that are going to be in today's, and, vice versa. There was probably names I would have put in that mock initially just off of what I thought I saw in them, by watching other players that aren't going to be on today's mock. So I think this is just a better product overall for you all. So I'm glad I decided to wait. And of course, we're putting this out on the Monday of the week leading up to week 0 of the college football season. I am pumped to have CFB back. And then, of course, the week after that, the NFL season is upon us. Real quick, before we jump into the mock, I do still have a couple position groups I'm going to be doing early rankings for. Next up is going to be offensive line. We're going to do tackles and interior offensive line all in one fell swoop, like we do with edge and interior defensive line. Definitely go back and check out any of those previous rankings that you maybe haven't seen just yet. And then after O-line is going to be corners. And then I think I'm going to put linebackers and safeties together. Those tend to be videos I don't do a whole lot in regards to engagement on their own. So I might just put those, those two position groups together. All right. Well, we know why you're here. Let's waste no more of your time. And let's jump right into it. And this is not my order. Obviously, I'm using the PFF NFL mock draft sim. And going back to position rankings, I'm going to be showing my hand a little bit on some of these, but hopefully you'll still check out those position rankings, get my full thought on the prospect and where they rank, whether it's 1, 3, 5, whatever, or, for the guys that, fill out the rest of that top 10 that aren't in today's video, but had the maybe potential to jump into the next mock draft that we do. But anyways, again, not my draft order, so don't yell at me. New York Giants are picking at number 1, and I totally understand, if they're picking at 1, more than likely, we're talking about new head coach, new GM, and that in turn does not mean that there's any sort of safety net for someone like a Jackson Dart. So you could go quarterback here, but I'm going to go Spencer Fano here to kick us off. He is the right tackle for Utah. He does have some time playing some left tackle, but this guy at right tackle, I think, would be a killer complement to Andrew Thomas on the other side. And this guy, if they do keep a Brian Daboll and they are going into a year 2 of Jackson Dart, his type of road grading, run blocking Mauler mentality would go a long way to kind of boosting up that run game, making an even easier situation for someone like a Jackson Dart, who has flashed pretty well here in the preseason. I'm actually really encouraged with what I'm seeing, against, some guys of lesser, depths of the depth chart, so to speak. But nonetheless, I think he's looked pretty good. But I think, Spencer Fano, that would round out that tackle tandem of the future. So I need to figure out some things on the interior, but would love what that would do for the run game. And of course, to me, obviously showing my hand here, to be the best tackle in the class. So I like that from a pass pro standpoint as well for Jackson Dart, even though he's not even necessarily the best pass protector on that Utah offensive line. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves. Then we get to the Cleveland Browns, and there's no real easy way of doing this. But I am going to go quarterback Cade Klubnik here. I get it. Shador's looks, solid in that first, preseason game. Gabriel finally got to have some action yesterday as of when I'm recording this. And, had the pick 6, but overall, I think bounced back from that pretty well. But at the end of the day, it's a 3rd and a 5th round pick. And if you're picking number 2 overall, I don't know if Stefanski's there. I don't even know if Andrew Barry's there, as much as I think he's a good GM. And I think Stefanski's a great play caller. So, ultimately the situation may just kind of push them out the door, and it may lead to, a new regime stepping in, wanting to get their quarterback. But again, no guarantee. There's a whole lot to be played out. But at this point, if we're not going to have Arch Manning in this mock, which I'm not, from, especially with his granddad coming out and saying that he's going to go back to school. We all kind of thought that, but he is draft eligible. So I've been putting him in rankings. But for this mock, we'll say, hey, he's not going to be a part of the mock. But I think Klubnik is the most NFL ready of this quarterback class. Probably presents one of the higher floors, if not the highest floor of any of these quarterbacks. And for a team that's been in, QB purgatory outside of, a year and a half with Baker Mayfield, where things felt like they were on the up and up, this team would probably opt for something in that direction. But I also do think if they kept Stefanski, he'd be a really good fit for that offense. So I know this is going to sound like I'm a Shador hater. He was my QB2 all last draft cycle. I don't want to hear it. And I was never a Dylan Gabriel guy. So if you want to call me a Gabriel hater, that I guess I can wear that one. But nevertheless, I think if you're picking number 2 there, you're probably going in another direction. But same can be true about the Giants. So I totally understand. But one guy was drafted in the 1st round. One guy was drafted in the 3rd and the 5th. So to me, the situations are just a little bit different there. Tennessee Titans, this team needs to bolster up that pass rush. Would love to see what TJ Parker would do for that defensive line. And I think he gets an added boost. Not that this is fair or not, but like after you're seeing the year Jared Verse had, these, speed to power monsters are going to start becoming pretty coveted. I think after you see the year that, Jared Verse has. So I think Tennessee could be like, what if we had one of those? And TJ Parker is definitely, to me, the best edge in this class. And it's a really good edge group. Like, don't get me wrong. And some of the guys who, are a little bit lower in this mock draft, but are edge 2, 3, 4, 5 off the board, all have the potential and the promise to potentially maybe becoming edge 1, especially the guy I have at my edge 2. Who would have thought the guy at my edge 2 would probably be the most likely to become edge 1. But anyways, I think TJ Parker would bolster that pass rush a ton. And I just would love to see at the NFL level, let's get this guy into a wide 9 and let's see what that speed and how much power he can generate off of that. So absolute bull in a China shop type of pass rusher, and also an NFL ready run defender. So there's a lot of immediate impact you get out of someone like a TJ Parker here at 3. To the Jets here for really deliberating between Downs and Woods. Decided to go with Peter Woods just because, dude, I mean, the top end of the IDL market is nuts. And I mean, Quinnen Williams is a part of that. But could you imagine having two guys like Quinnen Williams, essentially who are like, whoa, that guy's 315, but he moves like that? Peter Woods has a lot of, shades of Quinnen Williams in that regard. Also an awesome run defender. So they would absolutely, that tandem would take away any sort of like inside run possibilities against the Jets for the most part. And I also think Quinnen Williams, coming out, we saw potential of him as a pass rusher. I think he was a better pass rusher coming out than what I see out of Peter Woods in this exact moment. We'll see where the 25 season takes us. But I think that would be a good mentor-mentee relationship from a pass rush standpoint too. So I think this would be good for Woods. This would give the Jets that other interior pass rusher they've been looking to get next to Quinnen since JFM left. But again, I do want to, honorable mention here to Caleb Downs, because would love to see that type of a playmaking guy who could come down, crash into the box, and be a playmaker in a secondary that already features someone like a Sauce Gardner and company. So thought about Caleb Downs there, but decided to go with Peter Woods. All right, New Orleans Saints, easy one here. And also, he was my quarterback too, so it feels a little silly not to, but I'm going to go with Garrett Nussmeier. I'm a big fan of what Nuss's potential could be, and yes, that means the quarterback rankings, I had Nuss slightly ahead of Klubnik, but I also think part of that is just, I think there's a little bit more upside potential there with Nussmeier. He makes me think of Tony Romo with maybe a little bit more arm, but I don't know. There's also sometimes where you see Nuss, and I don't know if he's trying to get too cute with a touch, but there's also sometimes where you want to see a little bit more on his throw, so I understand where there's some people who don't think he has a great arm. Again, this is going to be a big year to kind of get a better idea. He's only a one-year starter during his time at LSU, and there's some flashes, some throws that go, holy cow, that type of timing, anticipation, and accuracy. Yeah, get this guy on an NFL offense. And then there's also some boneheaded decisions where you're like, I don't know what you were anticipating there, or the timing is completely off. So like, what's going on here? So I understand, but first-year starter there at LSU, I'm hoping some of those kinks get ironed out this year, and this would be a great story, right? Like he goes to New Orleans, and assuming they don't make a change at OC, it'd be Garrett playing for his dad, Doug. That would be a cool story in and of itself. And it's also, again, this is not me writing off Tyler Shuck. If you were around the channel last year, he was my quarterback 3. Nobody was pounding the table harder for, late first round, early second round consideration for Tyler Shuck more than myself. So I'm hopeful for him in New Orleans. Look no further than my last dynasty draft. I took him. He's my 3rd quarterback in a super flex league. So I'm optimistic, but nevertheless, it's no guarantee. He is still a 2nd rounder. And if the Saints are picking at 5 and Arch is in the draft, there's a lot pointing towards Garrett Nussmeier being a guy that they might like to add to that offense, and maybe him being the signal caller of the future. But it's also a big year for Nuss at LSU. There's still a lot to be made up about where his stock is going to go. All right, to the Carolina Panthers. This is where I'm going to go Caleb Downs. I think they have an okay safety room, but like this would be the shot in the arm that I think could take that secondary to another level. They already have J.C. Horn, who's a talented corner, but needs to be out on the field. And I just would love to see what a Jero Evero could do with a guy like Caleb Downs, who has all the athleticism to play over the top free safety. You'd like to see him be a more of a turnover machine. You like to see a little bit more of that ability. But nevertheless, I think part of it is people are avoiding him, and he's also great in the box. And, down the stretch last year at Ohio State, they basically ran this 3 safety set, and they play a lot of Tampa too. And he was just that, top middle zone where, he can go back and recover and be a deep middle third if someone gets, tries to challenge there and try to split the 2 deep safeties. But he's also a monster inside the box. I mean, he will tackle with no fear, and he wants to come up and lay the boom. So, he's just really fun safety. He brings a whole lot to the table. And he's also a good matchup option if you wanted to, blitz and play man coverage behind it. I think he can match up with slots and tight ends and even running backs out of the backfield. So I think he just brings a whole lot of versatility to a defensive mind that I think would value that and be able to tap into that at a high level. So Would love this for Downs, would love this for Ejiro Evero and that defense as a whole. All right, Las Vegas Raiders. Been beyond thrilled to see that Gerard McCoy is already back and practicing and doing some drills with Tennessee. To me, he is comfortable, and I like this corner class a lot. Corner is probably the position I'd like to watch the most, corners and receivers. But to me, Gerard McCoy is like comfortably CB1 in this class. And I like a good number of the corners in this class. But Gerard McCoy, I love this, love the tape. I think he had the best game of any corner against Ryan Williams last year. You know, Jalen Milroe didn't necessarily do a whole lot of favors for that Alabama offense. That was one of his more putrid games. But nevertheless, McCoy did not make it easy with his assignment against Ryan Williams. And really the only guy to ever get a leg up on McCoy was Jeremiah Smith. And I mean, show your hands if you're a college corner who got the best of Jeremiah Smith. It'd be a room full of hands up in the air, you know? So it is what it is. He's the next Julio Jones incarnated. So I'm not going to hold that too far against Gerard McCoy, but I like the size-speed combo. He's also very technically refined. I think you could play off zone with him, but he's also not afraid to go, you know, face-to-face and go play press coverage at the line of scrimmage. So a lot of versatility, and I also like that. You know, Patrick Graham, defensive coordinator, who is going to mix it up between man, zone, off, press, you know. So I feel like he would be that kind of one-size-fits-all number one corner for a very varied defensive scheme. All right, to the Indianapolis Colts. You know, this is breaking up my tackle rankings just a little bit, but part of it is like CC Maui-Goa. I've heard Maui-Goa. I've heard Maui-Noa also as well. Just, you know, sometimes it's an N and the G silent. So I'm no expert there, and I'm waiting to get a pronunciation guide on that. But if you know, I'd love to hear it. But I have heard he also wants to go by CC. Shout out the Daft on Draft guys, Corey and Dalton there for that. So CC is going to go here to the Indianapolis Colts. Braden Smith's still a good football player, but it's just, you know, getting up there in age. So I could see a world where they're looking for that succession plan. And maybe that's Matt Goncalves, but he's also been playing on the interior. So I would just like to future-proof that right tackle spot. And I mean, if Anthony Richardson can work out like this type of big body, physical mauler who moves well and carries his weight well, and when he connects, especially when he's climbing in the run game, I mean, he is going to blow up whoever he is squaring up. The problem is I think he goes for a few too many of the this is almost Kelvin Banks where it's like, I'm going to get the highlight reel block here. And he just doesn't quite square them up. And it'll just lead to like, you know, you should have had that at the second level. So there's a little bit of that where you want a little bit more out of Maui-Goa, but from a size, physicality, play strength, long arm, you know, so I think there's a lot there for Maui-Goa, and I think he could be the right tackle of the future. And again, him paving the way for Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson, you know, based run game is really exciting for me in that Indianapolis Colts offense. To the Dallas Cowboys, easiest pick of the mock thus far, Jeremiah Love. I'm going to be really curious to see what happens this year with him at Notre Dame. One, because I'm a Notre Dame fan, but two, last year Ashton Jeanty was one of my blue chippers, so he was higher in my big board than you would think a running back normally is. In my big boards, account for position value. That's how I would draft if I were a GM. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world for me to keep that approach. Jeremiah Love he's got a shot to do the same thing where he could be a top 4 player in this class that I don't think has a ton of blue chippers, but Love might be one of them. So he might be a top 4 player on my board. And this is just one of those spots where like Javonte Williams, you know, Phil Maffa, sure, there might be something there that's interesting, but I just don't see a whole lot in that running back room that inspires like a long-term game-changing type of confidence. Jeremiah Love, I think, would change that the second he put on the Dallas Cowboy hat on the draft stage in Pittsburgh next year, if this were to play out that way. So this one's kind of a no-brainer. Love brings a whole lot to the table, and I think this year we could see him do even more as a pass catcher, which is kind of the one thing you didn't get to see a whole lot of last year, but that's because he's carrying the load as a runner more than a receiver in that offense, which is just fine. Anyways, let's get on to the Cleveland Browns. Let's go with Caden Proctor. I mean, move Juwan Jones back to the right tackle spot, and this is going to be the biggest tackle tandem in my lifetime, comfortably, maybe even beyond that. Juwan Jones, massive human being with those long arms, and Caden Proctor. I mean, you know, he's listed at 368. In a lot of ways, I'd love to see him get down to like Anthony Belton at the Senior Bowl. Said he got down to 345, and he just looks so much more spry and light on his feet. I wouldn't hate if Caden Proctor got down to 345, maybe even just 350. You know, I think he could shed some of that weight. But, dude, if he's 368 and maybe a little bit more from some of the people I've heard from, the way he moves, it's pretty special. And when he's one of these guys where when he connects, I mean, good luck. His grip strength and once, you know, on the move, like there's just nothing. Force equals mass times acceleration. This guy's got mass and he accelerates pretty well for that mass. So if he connects with you at the second level, the play's done, bud. You know, like just pack it up. I do think his anchor could be a whole lot better. And that's one of the weird things. You look at someone who is this big, powerful offensive tackle, and it's just a technique thing. And I think just timing a little bit. he's also a guy that I think by the fourth quarter, that mass weighs on him. So no pun intended. I'd like to see him maybe get down to 350. I think that'd be good for his conditioning. And then I just think a little bit more coaching refinement with his hand placement, and then getting that anchor to be a strength. It should be for a guy as big as he is. And that's just going to take some coaching, I think. But you get those two things fixed, this would be a home run pick. And the Browns' offensive line is getting old. Like, it's an old unit, and it's gotten worse year over year over year. So this is the opportunity for you to kind of replenish, put something back into that, eat your vegetables, and then make that offense as a whole better for your quarterback that you took at number 2, but also the 2 running backs you took last year, and Sampson and Judkins. So would love this as an overall fit for that offense. Seattle Seahawks, you're next up. I'm going to go with Anthony Hill Jr. And, I had a couple mocks throughout last draft cycle where I gave the Seahawks some linebackers, and I get it. Dearness Jones is a good football player. Like, there's some good linebackers on that roster. I'm not taking anything away from them. But at the same time, Anthony Hill, like, I know Matt Miller from ESPN, friend of the show, was on the show last year leading up to the draft cycle. He's got him listed as an edge rusher. So I almost think where they brought back Uchenna Nwosu, could they just eventually replace him with Anthony Hill Jr. and him be this hybrid off-ball and edge rusher? If there's a guy to make it work, Mike McDonald would be my pick. Same thing I said about Nicky Manwari. I didn't love the player, but, if it was Mike McDonald who got his hands on him and basically had like super soldier version of Kyle Hamilton from an athletic testing standpoint, okay, sure, let's see where that goes. And we'll see where that goes this year. But also for the same reasons, this guy who's, vicious and fearless against the run, but also brings a ton of juice with his first step on the line of scrimmage as a pass rusher. It just moves more fluid than most guys on the field. That's kind of the thing with this pass rush profile. There's not a whole lot of necessarily moves that you're like, whoa, holy cow, draft this guy in the first round. It's just more so he's like evading bodies, and he's just more athletic and more fluid. So he's just evading people and making plays, which is not always going to happen on Sundays, but it's also like, whoa, this guy is a freak athlete at linebacker. So there's a few guys like that. There's a few linebackers that are going to be in this first round mock. How often, especially if you've been following me for a few years now, how often do I have more than one linebacker in a mock draft, especially in the first round? So it's a pretty special group from that standpoint. I think Anthony Hill Jr. with Mike McDonald, that could be a whole lot of fun. All right, New England Patriots. Look, I know they just drafted another receiver last year in Kyle Williams, but Kyle Williams is not an X. Jordan Tyson is an X. I think Jordan Tyson, once I get to do my big board, I'd be shocked if he's not in my top 10, no further than my top 15. So this is about the range where I'd be comfortable with it. And this would be your on the line of scrimmage X receiver. Then Kyle Williams would become your Z. And then out of the slot, it could be maybe Jalen Polk if he can figure out his career, or it could be Pop Douglas. Yes. Because look, Stephon Diggs is 31 coming off an ACL injury. Kayshon Boutte, I've heard, has had a pretty good camp, but at the end of the day, I think he would get pushed down the depth chart with guys who like Kyle Williams, who I think is just better. Pop Douglas, who I think brings a lot of spunk to the table. And then Jordan Tyson, who just absolutely, I think, is better. So like a long-term pass catching core of Tyson, Williams, Pop Douglas for Drake May, and Travion Henderson in the backfield. Yes, all around. This is clearly, to me, wide receiver 1 in this class. And I think he'd be that X that the Patriots just don't currently have. To the Los Angeles Rams here at 13. Avion Terrell, I think he's not necessarily my favorite corner in this class, but he is going to be somewhere in my top 5. But this is the scheme where I feel really comfortable with him coming off the board. He's a little slight, and it's just one of those things where, it's just not every corner is built the same, and he's just going to give up a little bit of that, jump ball ability. Like there's some receivers who box him out, and that is what it is. But he's also such a fluid mover, and even if he does get boxed out, he's going to get right on the line of scrimmage, and he's not afraid to go press you up the next play. And I love that type of mentality. You got me once, but not on this rep. And he's just kind of fearless. Nobody's told him that he's like 180. But he's also a great tackler for that too. Again, no one told this man he is as slim as he is because he doesn't play like it. So in this like quarters off zone coverage, heavy defense, sign me up, because his athleticism and his ball skills and his eyes will absolutely play in that. And then if they run his side, he'll be a force to be reckoned with there too. So I think the Rams, this is like the ideal spot for Avion Terrell to go in my eyes. Pittsburgh Steelers, they're hosting the draft next year. I think this would be as ideal as you could possibly get. No Arch Manning in this class, so obviously that would be as ideal as I could get as a Steelers fan. But no Arch in this. I'll go Drew Rattler, Penn State kid, going to Pittsburgh. That's the Pitt to Pittsburgh thing didn't really work, but maybe Penn State to Pittsburgh will. But all the tools in the world there for Drew Rattler. They've revamped that wide receiver room. Trebor Pena, I'm hearing, is crushing their preseason workouts and practices. So that should be the guy on top of Hudson from USC, who's a really nice contested catch player, and then the guy from Troy, who's kind of their deep threat. So I think they've now got a real wide receiver room around Drew Rattler. So now we get to actually see what he looks like because that's the meat on the bone that you're kind of missing last year with Drew Aller. It's just he's not comfortable. He doesn't have a whole lot of trust in the guys playing on the outside, and it showed, especially in the college football playoff where no targets to your receivers against a team that's only running man coverage. Look no further. That tells you he has no confidence in any of his receivers. So this year should be different. So we should see a different side of Drew Aller. So I'm hoping he takes another step forward and gets himself in this first round conversation. And odds are if he does take that step forward, he's not available at 15. But I do think with Pittsburgh hosting the draft, kind of shades of Green Bay last year, they haven't drafted a receiver in 2 decades, and now they're hosting, and then they finally do it. I think the Steelers would really like this to be the opportunity where hosting the draft, they get their franchise guy. And if it's an in-state dude, that would be the storyline that kind of, writes itself. On to the Miami Dolphins here at 15. To me, this was another pretty simple one. Just when you look at the current state of that cornerback room, it leaves a whole lot to be desired. And I know they've added some, like Mike Hilton's and that types later on in this, free agency, late in this offseason. That's nice and all, but those are Band-Aid fixes, and it's really just try to address some stuff this season for the Miami Dolphins. But long-term, I think this team is definitely looking for more out of that group. And A.J. Harris, to me, other than I wonder what the 40 is going to end up being, but other than that, man, he brings a ton to the table that I like. I think he's got man and zone flexibility. Another guy who 191 pounds, but maybe even plays a little bit bigger and more physical than that. But also 6'1". I think he's got pretty quick feet. So I think to me, he checks a lot of different boxes. Can be a versatile cornerback for Anthony Weaver, the defensive coordinator there. And I think that would give them that long-term, okay, who's the future of this cornerback room? I think A.J. Harris, my CB2, I think he would slide in there and he would be that guy. Again, long speed's just kind of my one concern that I have. And I know he's got some track numbers from, high school and whatnot. So comparing that to what they would project to be at a 40 doesn't, it's like 4.5 stuff. But that being said, that was in 2021. No idea where he's at. And Penn State's known for a great strength and conditioning program. So if he ended up being somewhere in the mid 4.4s, wouldn't shock me whatsoever. All right, to the Chicago Bears, I'm going to go with Ruben Bain Jr., a guy who I think his 2024 tape would have him in top 100 discussions. But once you see the 2023 tape, or if you've already seen that and then you watch 24 feels a little disappointing. But he was also battling a ton of injuries. But that 23 tape, you're like, this is the future top half of the first round player minimum. And I'm hoping we get to see more of that 2023 version of himself. And I think, and really here you have some flexibility here if you're Dennis Allen. One, he kind of fits this big power physical edge rusher that Dennis Allen kept drafting in New Orleans, so that checks itself. But also Montez Sweat, yes, they gave him that contract, but he's also someone who's creeping up on 30. Wouldn't be bad to get another body type like that, a guy who could eventually have the torch handed to him by Sweat. But also those two guys on the field, I think that's an awesome 1-2 punch against the run. And then Bain in passing situations, I think you probably kick him inside. You see even more of his athleticism against, interior offensive linemen too. So big, physical, powerful edge rusher. But I think when he's healthy, the 23 version of himself, there's a little bit more athletic juice, both in the first step, but in his bend. And I think especially against interior offensive linemen, he could be a really fun, mismatch type of tool there for Dennis Allen, the DC in Chicago. And plus, I just think that's a group where they're still looking to get a little bit better there. So Ruben Bain, this is, of course, the guy earlier I'm alluding to, wouldn't shock me if he ended this year as my edge one, because I do think that potential is in his ceiling.
Fast Draft has launched the Rabbit. It is our full best ball tournament, but it's done the Fast Draft way. 20-second time clock, just 15 rounds, 10 teams. That means we're going out and drafting 150 players total. Don't need to know the fourth receiver on the worst team in the NFL. Don't need to memorize the Week 17 schedule because it's total points, and you can follow your team's performance in the standings throughout the year. Because these drafts take just 20 minutes, a lot of casual people are finding this game. They're finding best ball for the first time, and also a lot of hardcore best ball players are loving this because they want a new place to play best ball with exploitable ADPs. That just happens to be a lot of fun. We've stumbled upon something here with this Rabbit tournament. We're very proud of it. Hope you check it out. First tournament, already 30% full after 1 week. So we're on to something.
Let's get on to the Arizona Cardinals at 17. I'm going to go CJ Allen. And, I think they have some competent linebackers there, but so maybe this will surprise you just because, another linebacker in the first round? Dude, CJ Allen, he just does so many things right. Love how he flies to the football. I think he's got great eyes and instincts. And for someone 235, at least that's what he's listed at, he really doesn't get caught up too much into the traffic, and he'll stick and hold his point. And I mean, there's a couple of reps that Jordan Reed was tweeting about some of his clips from the Notre Dame game. And dude, like that's a solid offensive line. And, it's Jeremiah Love barreling at you, and he just holds his ground and makes a tackle. Just plays a lot bigger than 235. And it's tough with some of these modern day linebackers. They're becoming more often than not 225 to 240. Really 225 to 235. Not a whole lot of these guys who are 240, 245 plus. But some guys just play bigger than that. Like not necessarily an off-ball linebacker, but like Nolan Smith, like a little bit light for an edge rusher than you would think, but like, man, holds his ground. And CJ Allen has some of that same stuff. And, maybe that's just what they're putting in the water at UGA, but I don't know. But yeah, like me some CJ Allen. I wish he was a bit more of a playmaker in coverage, but against the run and what he could be as a blitzer too, there's a lot of athleticism, and he's fearless crashing downhill and holds his ground really well for someone his weight. So really a big fan of him. And I think this would be a really fun piece for Jonathan Gannon in the middle of that defense. All right, to the Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to go to the cornerback position, and I'm going to go with also, I did want to see, did they add a guy in here? I was hoping they would add. They did not, it looks like. So we will have to go with one fill-in name because it doesn't look like my guy's here. And I really thought about going with, I'll just say it here. I thought about Keith Abney here from Arizona State. Big Keith Abney guy. Not to say too much, but he'll be in towards the top 5 of my cornerback rankings. We'll put it there. But I'm going to go with DJ McKinney, another guy who's going to be in my top 5 of my cornerback rankings once we get there. It's just still a group that I think there's just a little bit more of a ceiling I think that can be reached. Byron Murphy the second, I'd like to keep him on the inside. Mekhi Blackman, I think there's a good player there, but he's also coming off injury. And then they're kind of, bargain shopping at other spots in that cornerback room with other names there. So I think all in all, they're still looking for that number 1 outside corner of the future. And I think DJ McKinney, man, he's got a lot of the goods to do that. Long arms, 6'2". I've heard maybe it's closer to 6 foot flat, but man, he looks pretty well built. And, at least from a height standpoint, the main drawback for him is he's another one of these corners he's going to get boxed out a little bit. He looks like he's 180, maybe closer to 175. He's a little thin, but if he can add, honestly, 8 to 12 pounds of muscle, like the right 8 to 12 pounds. And I think that kind of alleviates that concern. But I think he's a great athlete, fearless at the line of scrimmage. Will go get your number 1 wide receiver. I even know last year, I know he's playing with Travis Hunter, so he didn't have to do that all that often. But he's just got that mentality. He's got that skill set to be that type of a cornerback. So, Brian Flores, he's made this push, playing a whole lot more zone. But I think when push comes to shove, 3rd and 5, 4th quarter, they're playing the lines. It's a huge game. I think Flores would like to sprinkle in a little bit more man coverage in there. And McKinney, starts to give you the ammunition to be able to do that. So I like that fit a ton. Keith Abney, DJ McKinney, I think either one of them would be a really fun fit to that Minnesota secondary. All right, Denver Broncos next up at 19. I'm stealing this one from Dalton Miller, another shout out to Daft on Draft podcast. They do a great job. But I'm going to go with Caleb Lomu here. And I think part of it is I think Dalton's kind of spot on. He might have even done this in their mock now that I think about it. But I think Lomu's right hand is pretty solid. And he currently plays left tackle for Utah. So he does a good job from that left tackle spot, if I can visualize this, preventing inside counters. But I almost wonder, and I also have heard that arms might be a little bit of a concern here for Lomu, might be on the shorter side. And the guys who have been able to break that mold, Luke Edeke, Braden Smith, they both play on the right side. So might be another reason we're shifting him over to the right side. But his right hand on the right side would prevent outside rushers from beating him. And I think he's good enough and athletic enough, and plus, you could probably scheme towards it enough where if he gets beat with inside counters, you can have a guard kind of pick up the slack there. So I do almost wonder if a flip over the right side could be the best thing for him. But as much as I love Spencer Fano, and he is my top offensive tackle in this class, it's because he lights people up, and he's just like an unstoppable force in the run game, while also being a solid, pretty good pass protector. Lomo, I think work in progress, needs to add to his frame, needs a little bit more muscle to be a true mover in the run game. There's a lot to like from a pass protection standpoint. Quick feet, really good mirroring ability, keeps the hands engaged. I like a lot of that. So I think this would be one where Mike McGlinchey, I want to say he's got 2 years left on his contract. Might be wrong on that. He might be on an expiring deal. But nevertheless, Lomu eventually, whether it's sooner rather than later, eventually becoming that right tackle of the future for that Sean Payton offense. And it certainly helps if he is going to make that transition. The right tackle, former right tackle of the New Orleans Saints, now offensive line coach, Zach Strief, is the O-line coach there in Denver. I think that would be an awesome guy to help facilitate that transition there for Caleb Lomu. So if there's a guy to make it happen, I think Strief's a pretty good candidate as an offensive line coach. All right, let's get on number 20. I pinballed a few different ways on this tweet. I almost went with Connor Lew here just because I do think center is a spot where they can definitely get better. But I'm going to do the boring thing, and I am going to go offensive tackle. I'm going to go with Isaiah World. I'm a big fan of World. The Nevada tape looks great. That being said, there's a big step up in competition coming his way this year from Nevada to Oregon. And he's another one of these guys where I don't think it's necessarily 8 to 12 pounds, but like, could we get another 5, maybe 10 pounds of muscle in this guy? That would be awesome. But I think he's a really fluid mover. I've heard that he's not really 6'8". He's a little bit shorter than that, but still, if he's 6'4", and we get him to 320, that's an awesome spot. He's a really good athlete on the move. I think some of the hand placement needs to get coached up a little bit. And I think some of that's just, and I mean, no disrespect to Nevada, but like just the detail and the coaching that you're going to get at Nevada versus what you're going to have at your disposal at Oregon. It's just a little different. So these little minor things with Isaiah World, I think are going to get cleaned up this year. The big thing for me is like he's just got a ton of unnecessary roughness and unsportsmanlike conduct penalties under his ledger the last couple of years in Nevada. So if we could just get him to kind of reel it in, control our emotions, keep our head in the game, minimize those penalties, then I don't have a whole lot of negatives to throw against him. But there's multiple times in the Nevada tape where you're like, okay, well, he just cost his offense 15 yards. So like, what? You won that rep. You didn't have to go that far. You didn't have to make that point. So little things like that. And it's just like a maturity thing a little bit that I just want to see him take that step forward. But I also want to see, hey, like Nevada to Oregon, as much as I think you have the goods to make that transition, let me see it first too. So he could go even higher in my tackle rank. He's really good. But just want to see it first at Oregon. And I also want to see where the maturity is at for him. But as boring as it is here, like I get at Ariante Irisworry, maybe he's their left tackle of the future, but also Blake Fisher isn't really inspiring a whole lot of confidence so far this preseason. I would be shocked if Trent Brown's on that roster again next year. And Cam Robinson maybe could be another Band-Aid, for one more year. But it might just be easier to go with Irisworry right tackle, World at left tackle, and then we'll continue to work on the interior as we go along. So going to be, and then also to that point, new OC coming in, probably going to be more gap. Oregon's pretty good about mixing up between zone and gap too. So I think this is a guy who will have some experience in that type of a blocking scheme that Houston would, I think, pivot towards this upcoming season. All right, let's go on to the Green Bay Packers here at 21. We're going to have a bit of a run on edge rushers. Let's go to Keldrick Falk. This is a fun football player, man. And he won't even be 21 by the time he gets drafted. But big, physical, powerful edge rusher. Mike Renner, another friend of the show, he's been on the show before. Kind of comparing him to Mike L. Williams. And honestly, I think I've seen the pass rush profile for Falk's a little bit more TBD. But with Williams, it's only really been in one game. I think Falk, it's just been more flashes over a bigger time period. So in some ways, it's like I think there might be I think it might be a little bit quicker to buy into his pass rush upside than I was with Williams because it's kind of just in that one game towards the end of the season 2 years ago. Versus like Falk, it's a flash here, a flash there. Okay, you're getting these little scattershot images of it. Can we get it more consistently? So that's going to be really interesting to see what Auburn can get out of him play in and play out from a pass rush standpoint. From a run defense standpoint, this guy's NFL right. I mean, he's got the body, he's got the power, and he's got the arm length. So, like, he checks all the boxes there. And, I mean, he is a Green Bay type of edge rusher. And this is going to be a huge year. Like, Rashawn Gary needs to get back to the level of play he was at, I guess, 2 years ago now to be justified the contract he's getting. Lucas Van Ness, former first-round pick, and he just hasn't necessarily played like it. So this is a huge year for him, too. So I wouldn't be shocked if one of or both those guys don't take a step forward this year, where Green Bay's like, okay, cool, well, that didn't work out. Time to backfill, time to go find some replacements. And I think Keldrick Falk would be their type. And I think there's something really interesting there just with how, like, dude, at 20 years old, like, or really in the last year at 19 years old, you're not supposed to be as strong and physically imposing as you are. And he's already got that, kind of card up his sleeve, if you will. All right, number 22. I'm going to go with Tyreek Sapp here to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I look at their edge group, and they've drafted some guys who could be heavy-handed edge rushers, but ultimately, like Logan Hall, but he's just moved into the interior. So, okay, there's that. Hassan Reddick, that's a one-year deal. Joe Tryon-Trainick is not really that type of player. So I think this is kind of the big power rusher they just don't currently have on that roster. A lot of what I said about Falk is true here for Sapp. He's just a little bit older. And I think Falk a little bit more flashes in the pass game as a pass rusher than I see out of Sapp. But nevertheless, like Sapp, he may only try to win with power and motor, but he's almost one of the best archetypes of like elite run defender and only winning with that because he does have a ton of power and his motor is ridiculous. So he's going to get a handful of pass rush wins with his power, and he's going to get some cleanup sacks because of his motor. So, like, there's some pass rush juice there. I would like to see him expand that portfolio a little bit this year for him to be able to move up even more in my rankings. But another one of these guys who's big, physical, and powerful against the run, too. So, NFL ready from that standpoint. And if you're Todd Bowles and you're back for another year, that's an easy type of edge rusher for him to be like, yeah, I can get that guy on my field. And also, I feel like defensive-minded head coaches, like, the ability to stop the run is always on their mind. And Sapp definitely brings that to the table. All right, let's get on to the Los Angeles Chargers. And again, sticking with edge rusher here, I'm going to go with LT Overton. And I know they drafted Kyle Kennard. I wasn't the world's biggest Kyle Kennard fan, but Khalil Mack back for one more year, Tuli Tuipulotu. And depending on where you are with Kennard, and we'll see where the season goes, you could play Overton on the edge, he does have pretty good bend and like ankle flexibility. That's what's like weird for someone who's like 280 pounds. He actually has like a lot of nimbleness to his game. He just doesn't have a great first step. And I think if you're going to see any athletic, edge that he could bring to the table, it'd be on the interior. I think you see more athletic juice when he's playing against guards versus tackles because he just doesn't have the burst and the speed and just really the first step to get out and around the corner and beat off the tacklers with their outside shoulder. He's just not that type of guy. Interior offensive line, though, we might be able to make something like that happen. And also with Jesse Minter being a great defensive coordinator, stunts and twists, with his flexibility and nimbleness, like I think that could actually really work. So I'm thinking here more like 3-4 defensive end than I am thinking edge rusher with LT Overton. And that ultimately is probably the best spot here for LT Overton. He's also a guy with like he should have had more sacks than he did, but he just doesn't have great closing speed and finishing ability from that standpoint. And really, it's not really finishing ability. It's just he's not as athletic as like a top tier elite, player, like, or even guys who are about to come off the board, like a Patrick, David Bailey, or even someone like an R. Mason Thomas. He just doesn't have that closing speed and that type of athleticism and that explosiveness. So honestly, playing him on the interior might do him a favor there because it's just a straighter line to the quarterback, from the interior versus the edge too. So I like this as a good fit. Feels like a Harbaugh type. He's going to stop the run at a high level. And then I think you play him as more of an interior guy, hopefully going to get a little bit more juice out of him and utilize those stunts and twists and his flexibility there to get the most out of him as a pass rusher. All right, to the Washington Commanders. As noted, David Bailey is going to come off the board in this first round mock draft. And I get it. Bailey is, Stanford made it pretty clear. This guy does not want to play against the run, and he is not good against the run. And look no further than him, like almost never on the field in an obvious running situation. The only time he's really on the field consistently last year for Stanford is in an obvious passing situation. And I've heard he's added about 10 pounds of muscle, and he's going to be a 3-down player at Texas Tech. So we'll see where this goes. I would love to see where this changes. And if he becomes an average run defender, he might be edge too, just because this guy as a pass rusher is bananas. Crazy first step, got the bend to get around the corner, a nasty spin move. He's got a good ghost move, a good stutter step move. Like this guy can come at you from a lot of different angles there as an edge rusher. And this team brings in a Von Miller. He's going to be a DPR type. So I also think like they've already carved out a type of role for him, like in a snap allotment, because I would assume Von is only going to be there for this year. You could basically just take those snaps and plug in David Bailey and have him do the exact same thing. And they have guys like Dorrance Armstrong who are going to be solid against the run. They have an infrastructure of guys who can play those early downs. And then I think you get into 3rd and 12 and you just let David Bailey, pin his ears back and, play like a maniac with his hair on fire. Like that's what I think what you would do. And I think that's what they're going to do this year with Von Miller. So I think they already kind of have like a built-in, way of getting him on the field and a role for him. So we like this a ton. And like I said, with 10 extra pounds, he might not be available here because he might just become a good enough run defender. He might be able to start setting an edge, and that plus his pass rush juice may get him off the board in, the top 12. Like, I don't think that's crazy at all. Anyways, let's go to the Cincinnati Bengals. This would be Keith Abney. But yeah, no Keith Abney in here. That's a bummer. Big fan of Keith Abney. So you'll have to come back for the cornerback rankings to hear my thoughts on the talented redshirt sophomore from Arizona State. But instead, I'm going to go with Xavier Scott, senior. And like, there's some Devon Witherspoon in him. The big concern is going to be the long speed. I just don't think Devon Witherspoon kind of surprised me running a 4.42. I was thinking more like 4.45, but nevertheless, we'll take it. Scott might be 4.5, and then he may be 4.55. So TBD on that. But everything else, man, this guy's a playmaker. He'll punch footballs loose. He's just kind of got that knack for him. He's a willing tackler. But I think also good and feisty in coverage too, especially at the line of scrimmage. Like this guy will go get you at the line of scrimmage. The other big thing is he's battled injuries too. So hopefully he can play a full season for what should be another really good year for that, Illinois defense. So it should be another banner year for that defense and him kind of at the center of that as like a cornerstone piece of it. But if he battles injuries, then, probably not going to be a first round pick. And then, depending on the 40 time, may not be everyone's cup of tea. But he's just a playmaker, man. He just does a lot of little things right. And even if that means because of his long speed not being great, he plays in the nickel, I could be fine with that. And like, think about what Mike Hilton, when he first got to Cincinnati, that first year he was there, he just left Pittsburgh. He was a playmaker for the Steelers. First year in Cincinnati, all the plays that he could make. Xavier Scott could be that at the worst. So, again, Keith Abney would have been the pick here. So this is a little bit of a placeholder because he's not in the mock draft sim yet. But nevertheless, like Xavier Scott, outside or in the slot, I think could be a really fun playmaker for that Cincy defense. That, dude, their offense is going to pour up points. Like for me, it's just like if you can steal a possession or two a game, and he's got the capability to create those takeaways, That's really all you need. So, his type of playmaking ability, I think, would be a fun add to that defense. All right, let's get to the Rams here at 26. Look, I know they just brought in Devontae Adams. He's on the wrong side of 30, and I do think he's a great fit. Don't get me wrong. However, let's see where it goes this year. Like, if Devontae Adams ever shows any signs of aging, Mekhi Lemon would be such a fun add. And also, they just keep insisting on paying Tutu Atwell. What if you just did it? What if you just didn't, and you let Mekhi Lemon do all that stuff? And there's definitely some like overlap there with, okay, well, if Puka's your Z/power slot, where does that fit in with Lemon? Because he would probably be, ideally at the next level, a Z or slot. So, and they just moved on from Cooper Kupp, I think, to get rid of some of that, similarity and that overlap of what role this guy's going to play. But nevertheless, hear me out. For a team that's going to run 11 personnel almost as much as anybody else across the league, maybe more than anybody across the league, let's just say Devontae Adams has a good year and he rolls back out next year and he's 33, but he's going to be your X. Puka as the Z and Lemon as the slot. You could even interchange those two guys. What's the problem with that? Like, I don't see anything wrong with that. Three guys who all fit that offense perfectly. Devontae being the X who takes on the line of scrimmage responsibilities, and then moving Lemon and moving Nacua up to the snap. Sounds great. Sounds perfect. And then, Puka's battled injuries. Devontae's battled injuries. You have a little bit of a security blanket in your back pocket with someone like Mekhi Lemon, who runs sharp routes, has really good hands, and I think plays bigger than his size. That's one point where, Dane Brugler put out his receiver rankings. Him and I don't really necessarily see eye to eye there, but it can be interesting to see where his playing size comes into play in contested catch spots this upcoming season at USC. I think he has got some physicality in him. He's just not going to play X receiver because he's not 6 foot, and he's not 200 pounds per se. But I think he brings a lot of physicality otherwise to the frame. But also he's a great yards after the catch guy. So just like Nacua there, where it's like he's a handful to bring down. Just another frustrating body type, another frustrating football player to have to bring down in that Rams offense. So I like it a ton. And then, eventually Devontae Adams got to hang it up. So, you still want to have a 1-2 punch. And I think Lemon Nacua long-term, that's a great 1-2 punch in my eyes. All right, Detroit Lions. This is another one where, because, I was changing some picks back and forth, what I want to do here for Houston, I was like, okay, this could be another Connor Lew spot. I know they got Tate Ratledge. I heard he was taking some snaps at center. Looks like right now he's back at guard. Miles Frazier's a solid player. I like the value they got him at. Could see him becoming a future guard starter, and that would allow you to move Ratledge to center. So I thought about all that. And they also drafted a guy I thought who was an underrated day 3 guy, and Ahmad Hassanin from Boise State. So I'm not giving up on him necessarily. But I could see a world where Ratledge is eventually moved to center, and then Frazier and Mahogany are your starting guards. And that to me was like, all right, let's do that. And I'm going to go Mateo Uiagalelei here at 27. It's a projection pick for sure. He's still a work in progress, but the flashes he shows last year, and keep in mind, he's 20 years old at this moment. The flashes he shows last year as a pass rusher are pretty awesome. And he's got a great build, 6'5", 270. He can win with length. He's got some wins with speed. He's got some wins with power, some with long arms. So he's won in a variety of ways. He's also got a lot of cleanup sacks because of guys like Derek Harmon and Jordan Birch and even Jamari Caldwell, pushing the pocket every so often. So, yeah, I get it. The production looks even better, but there's still some flashes of how he wins that are like, ooh, yeah, dude, that body type with that type of ability to create, here we go. But this year, he's got to get better against the run. And that's where, I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here, because if we're going just off my edge rankings, R. Mason Thomas would be the next guy. R. Mason Thomas, he can set an edge against the run, but that's about all you could really ask of him as a run defender. And Aiden Hutchinson already has shorter arms than you'd ideally want as an every down edge rusher, specifically if they run his side. So my thinking here is Uiagalelei, there's no reason someone 270 plays that weak against the run and is that soft at the point of contact. So that's going to change this year. There's no way that happens again. And if it doesn't change, then he's not going to be in the first round of my mock. There's just point blank simple. That doesn't make sense to me. But I'm assuming he's going to get better, add a little bit of mass, maybe, if that's what's missing here. He's going to be a better run defender this year, hold up at the point of attack, and hopefully we get to see his pass rush profile grow even more. And instead of him being the beneficiary of cleanup plays, he's the guy who's disrupting all this, finishing plays, but also creating for his teammates. So it's a projection for sure, but I think there's a lot of talent in Uiagalelei, and he's still on the younger side. So I think, and it's also a great Dan Letting defense. That's a defensive-minded head coach I would really trust with a talent like Uiagalelei. So I think he'll take that step forward, and I think this would be a really fun add to that defensive line. Again, thought about Connor Lew here just to have him at center, Ratledge at one guard spot, Mahogany, and then Frazier could kind of be the one-size-fits-all backup swing interior offensive lineman. I would love that as well. But Edge is still a spot where they're going to need to pour some investments. As much as I like Hassanin and obviously love Aiden Hutchinson, I think one more guy, and I think Mateo Angale is going to make that step forward this year. All right, let's go into your offensive line. Here is the aforementioned Connor Lew, to me the best center of the class. Love him on the move, but he's also bigger than guys like a Parker Brailsford or even like a Logan Jones, who I love out of Iowa. He's got a little bit more mass. He's 300 pounds. He's also got a little bit longer arms than some of those guys. So I really don't have as much of the question marks. Like Jones, sometimes he can play with good leverage, but he's got shorter arms. So sometimes guys just get into his chest and there's just nothing he can do about it. Lou's going to have adequate arm length. So he's got the movement skills, power, and without some of those, quote unquote deficiencies. So I like him as a pass protector, but would love what he could do in this run game. And that's, Dominic Pooney was a huge hit for this team at right guard, but left guard and center let them down big time. And especially, center like Brock Purdy, pressure right in his face, you would like to avoid that. So I think Connor Lew would be a huge upgrade for this pass pro, but also with this wide zone, getting these guys out to a spot and creating for these running backs, like Connor Lew would be an awesome addition to that run game. So absolutely fantastic scheme fit. And again, to me, the best interior offensive lineman in the class. All right, number 29, Kansas City Chiefs. Kind of a similar thinking I did with Xavier Scott and the Bengals. I'm just going to go Dylan Thieneman. Brian Cook, I think he was like 60 out of 80, graded safeties last year from PFF and primarily playing free safety. And I thought Brian Cook was a solid player coming out of Cincinnati, but Thieneman is just a different breed. Like this guy is a awesome over the top free safety center fielder. Got to clean up the tackling. And because he is a playmaker and a ball hawk, there are some times where defenses will play into that and he'll take the cheese. So he's got to clean that up. But that was also at Purdue. And again, I think there's just not necessarily a Nevada to Purdue, it's not even necessarily Nevada to Oregon like Isaiah World, but Purdue to Oregon. I think there's a step up in what type of coaching and, what type of work, we'll say, and resources he has at his disposal. So I think he's going to be an even better player, even more refined. I think, the taking of the cheese is going to take a step back this year, and we'll probably see him become a better tackler as well. Then you get all those instincts and that range over the top too. So for a Kansas City offense that is, it's Patrick Mahomes. At the end of the day, 2-minute drive, I got to have one QB lead it. I'm taking Pat Mahomes. So like that offense with a defense where Steve Spagnuolo is dialing it up and just throwing crazy blitz packages at these guys, you just plug this type of playmaking free safety over the top of that. Yes, like this is how you start stealing possessions from teams, because that pass rush is going to do its job. And Thieneman, I think, is the type of playmaking safety that will capitalize on those opportunities. So I really like it. And I also think there's a little bit of room to grow from Brian Cook, who, as much as I liked him as a prospect, it just, hasn't fully panned out just yet. Let's get on to the Philadelphia Eagles at 30. Another just Howie Roseman special here. I'm going to go with Joshua Josephs. Small sample size just because of the rotation there at Tennessee and also the guys that were ahead of them last year. This guy has a good first step and crazy long arms, forced like 3 fumbles last year, can bend the corner. Didn't play a whole lot against the run, so this year it's going to be another one of those, let's wait and see what happens here. Do they trust Josephs against the run, or they're going to hide him there, and is that clearly his liability? But even if it's just a pass rusher, if he's just, kind of the next Bryce Huff for this defensive line, the next Josh Sweat, and more so like Huff, like, not a great run defender, but God, some moments there were, some really nice pass rush juice, specifically when he was with the Jets. But nevertheless, Joseph, I think, could bring a lot of that same type of production to the table there with Philadelphia. So definitely a little bit of a projection. We'll see where this season goes, but he should have a bigger sample size, more playing time on his plate this year, and especially against the run. If he can hold up just enough there, I think he's going to have a really nice pass rush profile to where, like, if he's good enough as a run defender, the pass rush juice is going to get him in the first round, especially with that arm length. I think he's going to be a really fun prospect from that standpoint. Baltimore Ravens next up. I'm going to go with Denzel Boston. This is just the X receiver they currently don't have. As much as, DeAndre Hopkins, it's cool. He's probably selling some jerseys. And, Tez Walker, maybe there was some hope for him. And I was kind of optimistic when he first went to UNC, but that year at UNC and then his Senior Bowl kind of diminished those hopes I had. And haven't really seen him on the field a whole lot since getting into the NFL. So I think Denzel Boston's an upgrade over both those guys, given where they are in their careers. But this is your big physical X receiver, also pretty fluid on the move. I would just like to see him bulk up just a little bit. But, when we had Dalton Wasserman on for our wide receiver rankings, he had Boston at number 2 because he saw a lot of Jaden Higgins. Ask the Ravens fan base if you had Jaden Higgins plus Zay Flowers plus Nelson Aguilar and Rashad Bateman and Derrick Henry and Lamar, oh yeah, sure, yeah, Jaden Higgins would be a great addition. That's the X receiver we need. Okay, well, here's your second chance at getting that opportunity here at 31. All right, and then the Buffalo Bills, and a couple of the guys I want to talk about real quick. Slaughter, I don't know necessarily first round, but one of the better interior offensive linemen in this year's class for sure. Torian York just missed the cut there at linebacker. Great spy option, freak athlete. Sam Levitt, I just didn't want to have too many quarterbacks. There's a lot of teams you could have just thrown a quarterback at, right? Like the second Rams pick, I could have just thrown a QB their way. And then, like the big one, everyone's going to be like, okay, well, what about Lenore Sellers? I get it. I hear you. Look, I think there's just as much opportunity that he's a top 5 pick as he goes back to school. So, really all the 27 guys, like Arch is going to probably go back for 2027. Levitt might need one more year. So let's not guarantee that he comes out this season. He's a 1-year starter at Arizona State. And Sellers, it got better down the stretch, but there's really a couple of games people are holding on to at the end of the season. I'm not a Lenore Sellers hater. Don't get me wrong. Would love to be wrong. Would love to see him be the number 1 overall pick next year because that would be good for football. And I'm a fan of football and the product itself. So would love to see that. But I think there's just as much an opportunity that he goes back to school, that he goes top 5. And then Nico Amaliava, I think he will almost certainly go back to school. That UCLA offense is going to be an interesting one to watch. So just wanted to address some of those prospects. I know I'm going to get a ton of hate for the Lenore Sellers not going in the first round. But again, I don't even think it's a guarantee he comes out this year. But a lot of time between now and then there's certainly a lot of upside in his game. Just want to see some more of his game. But for the Buffalo Bills, man, I get it. Terrell Bernard's a fine football player, and Matt Milano, when he's healthy, is a good football player too. But I just worry about his health consistently. And I know they got Dorian Williams. There's a lot of different, there's a lot of reasons maybe they don't go Sonny Styles here. But dude, screw it. I'm going Sonny Styles. This guy's a freak athlete. And I think in a zone-heavy defense, his type of athleticism and range, and just he's everywhere and nowhere all at once, almost. I think that would be a huge boost to the middle of that defense, and also could use him as a pass rusher too. You could get a little creative there too. So Sonny Styles rounds out the first round of my first 2026 NFL mock draft. Here it is one more time. Picks 1 all the way through 32. Again, I know the Lenore Sellers thing not being in the first round. That's going to irritate a lot of people. Definitely could have slotted him in the Rams and just said, "Hey, Sean McVay is going to teach him how to pass." But again, I think he's more raw than people want to lead on. And I'm just not really going to anoint that just yet. And also, this is a better quarterback class in some ways than last year, but don't get too caught up in the idea of 6 quarterbacks going to the top 12. I don't think it's that type of class. So 3 quarterbacks here round 1, I think that's pretty realistic. So I basically just kept all the 2027 guys who would likely be in that class out of this one. But I'd love to hear your thoughts outside of those quarterbacks. Who should have gone in this first round? I'd love to hear your thoughts there. Who did I snub from this first round mock draft that I'm doing here for the 26th cycle? And then also, I'd love to hear who you think's too high. Who went? Do you think Spencer Fano could be a number 1 overall pick? Let me hear your thoughts there. Is Garrett Nussmeier? Am I overrating him here at number 5? Love to hear all those thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're watching on X, reply back to this or shoot me a DM. Happy to respond. Be cordial if you want a response. Otherwise, get ready to get ignored or blocked. But, if you're cordial and you're just trying to have a football discussion, I'm happy to have that with you. So leave me those thoughts down below or in a reply back to this post or in my DMs. Again, follow me on X at TJ Wengert, spelled Wengert. And like I said at the top of the video, next up, offensive line rankings, tackles, and interior. And then we're going to jump over back to the defensive side and get onto my cornerback rankings. So excited to round out these position rankings. And dude, I'm pumped up. This is the Monday leading up to week 0 of the college football season. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So with all that said, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, we are signing off.